Okay. So, good morning, all my friends over here in India, and a very good evening to all those in the United States of America, and a very happy Thanksgiving weekend for those who are in United States, as well as those who are in India. And this is the 98th episode of our continuing medical education programs being conducted by Andhra Medical College since 8th of August last year. And as you are all aware that we had excellent speakers on this forum. We had beautiful exchange of ideas and knowledge. And I'm very thankful to all those who have contributed to the knowledge of everyone, particularly Dr. Sridhar Chilimuri, my good friend, Dr. Kairam, Dr. Guntupalli, Dr. Mohammad Adrish, so on and so forth. And to make it very interesting, we thought the last 4 episodes, that means we are soon reaching the 100. I thought in the last 4 episodes we should have something like a wind up. So we have chosen the topics and the speakers in such a way that they can give the overall view of what we have learned over the last 1.5 years. So this idea in mind, we have invited Dr. Rakesh Garg, who is a very renowned speaker, a renowned personality in the anesthesiology, and the life support is basically his close to his heart, and he tours extensively teaching people. He's a very prolific writer as well, and I have invited him for this. Basically, as you are all aware, that the COVID-19, particularly in the second wave, the severe disease, the steroids and the oxygen have become the important game changers. They have saved many a life. At the same time, as we all have not witnessed, that oxygen has been used, misused, sometimes it is abused also. So I requested Dr. Rakesh Garg to address these topics particularly. And to moderate this session, we have a very illustrious teacher, the chairman of the Indian Resuscitation Council, and the person who is responsible for imparting this knowledge on the of resuscitation. The and he is a renowned person worldwide in this particular aspect, and he was the past additional director of health, government of Andhra Pradesh also. He is both an administrator as well as an academician, an outstanding anesthesiologist as well. When you look at his technical skills, so I requested him to moderate this particular session, which I thought would be very appropriate. With these few words, I welcome you all again, and I would request Dr. Chakkar Rao to go ahead and introduce Dr. Rakesh Garg and the subject. And I request Dr. Rakesh Garg to proceed later with his presentation. And we will have a discussion at the end of the session. And there are many teachers over here, Dr. Prem Kumar and others, who will be chipping in, and they'll be giving expert comments. Dr. Sridhar Chilimuri also will be joining any moment. And once he joins, he'll also give his expert comments towards the end. Over to you, sir, Dr. Chakkar Rao.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this session. I introduced Dr. Rakesh Garg. Rakesh Garg is an additional professor of anesthesiology. Actually, he is in the section of onco-anesthesiology at Birach in All India Institute. He has a lot of publications, about 260 publications. He has co-authored or he has written chapters in 6 books. And of course, he has contributed to many things, like wherever we teach and all those things. And he is in 2017, when we have picked up some people to establish the Indian guidelines for resuscitation, he has come forward as one of the persons from all over India, and he has written the guidelines that are needed for the Indian scenario where the ambulance services and the emergency services are not existing. So apart from that, he recently is selected as one of the task force members of the ILCAR. So this is another thing. And he is also given President Appreciation Award of the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists. And actually, both of us are we are in the last day of the 68th annual conference of the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists. Not only this, there are many achievements for Rakesh Garg, and I invite Rakesh Garg to start his presentation.
Thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you so much, Dr. Professor P.V. Sudhakar Rao, for the kind invite. I'm must congratulate you and your team for wonderfully organizing the COVID seminars almost last 1.5 years. And it is very, very useful. I have attended few, and it is very, very useful to be a part of it. And thank you for inviting me and allowing me to be part of it. So as you suggested, we'll be talking about the the oxygen, its optimal use, and lessons we have learned from the last 2 waves of COVID. You all agree that oxygen, we have been using it for very long. We have considered it, used it, misused it, disused it at various point of time. But on the other hand, I have learned, as I have learned from my teachers, that oxygen is also a drug. So it has to be used very judiciously, like a drug, where we talk of its dose, we talk of its duration, we talk of its flow. So this means though oxygen is a life-saving molecule, but it is being like a drug, we also have to use it appropriately. And we have seen sometimes during the COVID that because of the high requirement of oxygen for multiple patients, its shortage has become an issue at many of the centers. So this means it will be an emphasis that like a drug, we use it if judiciously, it will be a very useful thing. If we misuse it, then probably it can backfire us. I bring greetings from my institute. I work at All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Now this COVID-19, over almost, you can say it's almost reaching 2 years now that it emerged as a pandemic. It has taught many lessons in life, whether it was respect to its manifestation, its treatment, and it is also philosophical, has taught many things, and we'll be touching one aspect of it, the COVID-19. The management has emerged over time. We have seen various strategies for management of COVID, whether it was with regards to ventilatory strategies, airway management, oxygen use, drug use, and so on and so forth. So this means the learning from COVID has been enormous. We know many of the evidences have come up and it has proven its usefulness in COVID-19. Many of the things which was considered maybe useful, but later on it was found that they are not of much use, and certain things were even found to be harmful. So this is an evolving learning experience from the COVID that is ongoing. Probably in some of the countries where the third wave of COVID is being experienced, I hope and I wish that this does not exist for India. We remain all safe, but then we have to be well prepared for any eventuality. We should all know this, that we still have to remain some time with the COVID. So let's see some of the aspects of oxygen and its management. The learning and training process is ongoing, and so will be the seminars like this, where we can discuss, where we can share our knowledge with each other and try to come up to a strategy that will be useful to majority of patients given the available infrastructure. Now this graph, I'm just repeating it. I'm sure most of you must be knowing it, that when we talk of the COVID runs through various phases. So once a person is infected with COVID virus, there will be an incubation period where the viremia will happen, the viremia will decrease, and when the viremia start increasing, the body response will happen, and the patient will start showing response. And it is primarily the intense inflammatory response that brings about changes in the body, primarily the lung alveoli, and then wherein if it not controlled or it further progresses, or the body is not able to control this extreme amount of inflammatory response, the patient goes into early pulmonary phase, wherein COVID-related ARDS happens, and the exchange of oxygen is hampered at the alveolo-capillary complex. Once it progresses, it goes into late pulmonary phase, where the lung is not able to take care of its function of the effective and optimal oxygen exchange at the alveolar level. And this is where we are talking about the oxygen therapy. Majority of patients, luckily in India, has been into just phase 2, where there was mild symptomatic. The alveolar function was working properly, and hence they do not require ventilatory support. But a couple of the patients, maybe 5 to 10% patients, would have intense amount of inflammatory response, and hence they would require supplementation of oxygen. We have also understood that the clinical symptomatology of this disease has been enormous. To start with, it was related to just respiratory, but then subsequently we found that it affects the body from top to bottom. We have seen various neurologic symptoms, we have seen renal symptoms, we have seen hepatic symptoms, we have seen patients with having myocarditis, cardiomyopathies. It has deranged the blood sugars, causing a lot of endocrinal effect, and a lot of other things has happened with the manifestation of COVID-19. But the respiratory component remains one of the prime things. It is the prime thing wherein the virus settles down and brings about the change in the body. And that's why the respiratory supports remains one of the important aspects for COVID-19 patient, especially patients suffering with moderate and severe COVID-19. Various ventilatory strategies has been coming up. Initially, it was thought that it was primarily an ARDS as related to sepsis, but subsequently it understood that the manifestation in the alveoli was little different from the sepsis ARDS. The things was little different. It was primarily related to some amount of embolism, some amount of thrombosis. It was little different, and hence the strategy was also different for management of these patients. This thrombotic and thromboembolic phenomena was enormous in COVID-19, and this was considered to be one of the aspects for even the respiratory management, because the emboli to the respiratory system will lead to the respiratory dysfunction. And hence it was realized that appropriate measures needs to be taken to prevent thrombosis and also to prevent thromboembolic phenomena, so that the respiratory functions remains normal. And the reasons were many. These patients would have underlying comorbidity, which increases the chances of endothelial dysfunction, especially at the level of lungs. And that can lead to various amount of thromboembolic phenomena. And that is what was led to the various manifestation. So this hypercoagulability and thrombosis, which happened in these patients, were also responsible for respiratory compromise. And this hypercoagulative and thrombosis was being managed using multimodal prophylactic approaches for preventing thrombosis. And in those patients where the thrombosis was existing, the preventive phenomena to prevent embolism was also taken care of. Having said that, in these patients, those who were having primarily the lung involvement, maintaining oxygenation was one of the important aspects. So when we talk of maintaining oxygen, we have to understand two things here. One, the oxygen itself, it should be available. And second is how it needs to be delivered to the patient. So understanding both aspects was important, because oxygen was not required for everybody. We are talking about permissive hypoxemia in these patients because there was shortage of oxygen. Using the appropriate tool for delivery is equally important, because if you don't use the appropriate tool for delivering oxygen to the patient, probably the patient may not be, you can say, optimally utilizing the oxygen in these patients. If we use a device which delivers more oxygen concentration, more oxygen flow, we are wasting it. If we use a device which is less, patient may be getting hypoxemic. So this means that means to deliver oxygen to these patients also needs to be judiciously used when we talk of optimal use of oxygen. We also need to understand the various ventilatory management in these patients, because the appropriate and timely management of the patients with regards to the respiratory component is very important, because once the hypoxemic insult sets in, it will bring it more amount of metabolic, catabolic, and inflammatory changes in the body that will lead to multi-organ dysfunction. And hence, we have to prevent hypoxia in these patients at any cost. And that's why we have to choose for various modalities. When all COVID started, we were concerned that these patients needs early intubation. Then subsequently, we realized that the early intubation may not be a good option in these patients. We can use them with oxygen. We can use them with non-invasive ventilation strategies. And then came up with the strategy of high flow nasal oxygen supplementation in these patients. And this has become a very popular aspect of supplementing oxygen in these patients. So this means the oxygen has to be used in these patients judiciously, and the selection of the devices needs to be done appropriately. As I mentioned, that we need to set some target, which I'll be coming a little later, for an endpoint for oxygenation, or you can say oxygen therapy to these patients. And hence, to achieve that endpoint, we have to use the device accordingly. To start with, if a patient is a borderline oxygen, maybe we can say 90, 92%, we can start them on nasal cannula or a face mask. If patient is not getting maintained on this, we can start them on Venturi mask. And then what is called non-rebreathing mask can be used subsequently. If the patient is not maintaining oxygenation of 92 to 94% on these devices, we can escalate these patients on other devices. Now, as I mentioned earlier, devices like this, which can supply oxygen at high flows, even up to 60 to 70 liters per minute, has become a boon for oxygenation or management of oxygen therapy in these COVID-19 patients. And this device has allowed us to prevent intubation, which has various concerns in the management of COVID-19. The change between the oxygen therapy, which I just mentioned, over to the non-invasive ventilation and the mechanical ventilation, along with an interface of use of high flow nasal oxygenation delivery devices, we need to understand the transition from one to other. We have to select the patients accordingly, and we have to select the oxygen delivery devices accordingly based on this. As I mentioned earlier, that when we talk of the oxygen therapy, the target is not 99 or 100% oxygen. And I think this is one of the important aspects for clinical management of these patients. When we start supplementing oxygen, we think that all patients should maintain 100% oxygen on pulse oximetry. We have realized that the target oxygenation, target pulse oximetry reading, SpO2, may not be 100%. Even when we try to maintain it somewhere at 93, 94%, the patient is okay. There is optimal delivery of oxygen to the peripheral tissues, and the aerobic metabolism continues. So there is no need to continue them with high flow, just with a target of 100% saturation. 92 to 96% would be acceptable. And with a patient with a history of COPD, a lower amount, because the patient is also already compensatory changes has already happened in these patients, they would be more than happy to have a saturation of 88 to 92%. So I think this is one of the important aspects we need to consider, because maintaining an oxygen supply at high flows just to achieve 100% may not be desirable for majority of these patients. And then accordingly, we can use the devices the various algorithmic sequence which I just mentioned to you, and these can be used accordingly so that we can achieve this target. Now, in case if your oxygen delivery devices is not giving this, we can continue with other type of non-invasive ventilations and gradually can increase them so that the patient achieves the target saturation, which I just mentioned. The use of nasal cannula has also emerged a very important aspect. But in certain group of patients, when they are not maintaining, their respiratory rate is very high. They are hugely compensating for the hypoxemia that is happening in these patients. And the patient is having multi-organ involvement. So these are the patients probably which would require invasive ventilation for airway management, including airway management for achieving the target oxygenation. But then we have realized that the judicious selection and judicious use of this type of invasive ventilatory management needs to be done as per the patient's assessment, and the outcome can be affected. Not only this, we also need to understand that the airway management in these patients remains an issue, because these patients have had a very poor reserves, and these patients do have risk of contamination of the personnel who are managing the airway, including the oxygen therapy, because the virus is in the airway. So any manipulation will lead to release of this virus into the atmosphere, and hence increase the chance of contamination of the environment, including the healthcare personnel who can be infected. And we have seen a lot of them happening in this. We have a couple of guidelines. I may not be going into details for these airway management guidelines, but those who are interested to learn the various concepts of airway management in COVID-19 patients, I think these are the 3 good articles which has been published. One from our group as IDA consensus guideline, one for critical care group, and one again has come from the other critical care group from the European countries. And all these 3 guidelines have been very well framed, and they will be useful reading material, those who are interested to go into detail more about the airway management in COVID-19 patients. Now, this is what we have talked about of the airway management. We need to have sufficient airway devices, and we advocate the stepwise approach for using the airway devices and the airway management strategies for these patients so that these patients remain safe. And whatever the oxygen delivery devices we are using, they are sufficient for the patient to maintain oxygenation. We need to maintain all precautions while we are managing it so the healthcare personnel remain safe. And the modalities of the ventilatory strategies for optimized oxygenation needs to be individualized. Since these patients, as I mentioned earlier, do have respiratory pathology, they have changes at the level of alveolar capillary complex. These patients probably would be happy to be maintained on a pressure mode of ventilation so that we can achieve the oxygenation without higher peak pressures, because they can cause trauma to the alveoli. Non-invasive ventilation to start with, again, we can titrate using appropriate CPAP and PEEP in these patients. We can titrate the FiO2 as per the patient requirement. And then accordingly, we can think of other strategies also. The prone ventilation, as you all know, has emerged as one of the very important strategies, as it can recruit the lungs, the dormant lungs, and the oxygenation becomes better. We also think that certain drugs like steroids has an anti-inflammatory response and was found to be useful to decrease the requirement of oxygen in these patients, and hence should be used timely and judiciously. It has been seen that the overzealous use of steroids has led to many things. Again, as we talk about oxygen, the use of various drug therapy also needs to be used judiciously. The prone position has been found to be very useful with regards to the decrease in the FiO2 in these patients. They should be attempted appropriate timely for prolonged duration. When we talk of ARDS, we are talking about 6 hours, 8 hours of prone position. But in COVID-19, we have seen that even the extended duration of proning was very helpful, even for 12 to 16 hours. Target again is not 100%. We should be happy with 90, 92, 94%. But remember that when these patients are ventilator prone, maybe become an issue, the patient may have other conditions, other organ dysfunction also. So we should be very cautious when we are doing proning for these patients. We should learn and do the proning appropriately so that we can deliver oxygen therapy proper to these patients. Having said that, when we talk of oxygen, it's just not the ventilator, it's just not the oxygen therapy. We should be optimizing the other organ function also with regards to the hemodynamics, with regards to the renal function. And hence it becomes very, very essential to think of other management strategies for optimizing multi-organ functions. With regards to the oxygen therapy, again, chest physiotherapy remains one of the very important aspect. These patients should receive chest physiotherapy timely, appropriately, and with support so that the lung remains regulated, the oxygen cascade, the oxygen delivery becomes appropriate and optimal to take care of these patients. The general strategies like head and elevation, oral hygiene, glycemic control, all those supportive measures that we talk about in critically ill patient also needs to be followed, because these simple steps, what we have learned in the last 1.5 years, it is just not the ventilator, it is just not the high flow oxygen that would save the patient, but this has to be in conjunction with small other things also, like head and elevation, control of blood sugar, control of thrombosis, management of embolism early, chest physiotherapy, prevention of any source of other infection. So all those packages should be provided to these patients so that these patients as a whole remain stable. The organ function dysfunction is not happening, and the optimal function of the patients is being maintained. And all this requires a rational use of medical oxygen. We have seen in the last 2 waves, especially in the second wave of COVID-19, there was a lot of hue and cry for the oxygen shortage. We were running post to pillars to get the oxygen. We are talking of the liquid oxygen plants here. We are talking of the oxygen concentrators. A large pool of oxygen concentrators were shipped into the India. A lot of manufacturing happened to deliver oxygen using these oxygen concentrators. So this means on one side, I just mentioned that we have to use the oxygen delivery strategies as per the patient assessment, as per the patient target, and that mandates that we should be well prepared for any eventuality that happens. The second wave has made us more judicious, more wiser, and we are now well equipped with various strategies for oxygen management. I will take you through in next couple of slides also, that we have to be very rational and very scientific for the use of medical oxygen, which is a drug, as I mentioned earlier. One is definitely, once again, though they may not be directly related to today's session, but I just want to emphasize that we all have a responsibility to create awareness among the public that the preventive strategies and the vaccination remains one of the important aspects so that we are not flooded again with a lot of patients into our health infrastructure. We should create awareness with regards to various COVID appropriate behaviors. We have to create awareness for receiving the vaccination, which I agree it may not be 100% preventive, but yes, in case if it happens in a patient who is vaccinated, the severity is obviously less, and many of the patients remain on a milder side and hence not loading the infrastructure, the medical infrastructure too much. Now, when we talk about the medical oxygen and the hue and cry that we have seen, especially in the second wave, that the medical oxygen is required across many levels of health system. And for COVID-19, it was primarily for respiratory condition, I agree. And that was primarily one of the major component was the embolism. But what we need is we need to have a reliable supply that happens in this, because the demand was much higher and the supply was less. The hospitals were overburdened with oxygen requiring beds. And that is what has led to the shortage of oxygen. And that is what requires several precautions that must be observed while handling oxygen in order to ensure judicious and rational utilization of the oxygen. Now, coming to the pediatric age group, that how can we rationalize the use of medical oxygen for newborns? We have to select the indications. As I mentioned, that all will not require maintenance of 100% oxygen. So this means many of the patients who are maintaining 96, 97% with proning, with steroid, with chest physiotherapy, deep breathing exercises may not be possible for neonates, but yes, they are possible. They are good strategies for adults. So we have to build up those strategies so that we can accept our target for the saturation in these group of patients. Try to look for the clinical signs in case if the pulse oximeter is not available. And based on this, you can start using oxygen. Now for neonates, as I mentioned earlier, just to provide you a framework that how much oxygen should be given to these patients, we can use the devices, nasal cannula, we can use it, face mask, we can use it, even high flows. And then we try to target a saturation of 90 to 91 to 95%. And then accordingly, we can start the oxygens in these patients. Now the flow in these patients is based on the weight. So because we have to use it judiciously, say probably say 1.5 kg neonate would require a half a liter of oxygen per minute. And that's why if we give it much higher, we will be wasting it. And hence, we should understand this table again and try to administer the oxygen as per the need of that particular individual. You can start this oxygen at half to 1 liters per minute, look for the saturation, and then increase slowly so that you can achieve that target of 91 to 95% and then take decision accordingly. In case if the patient is not maintaining, rather than just increasing the flow because it is not going to help much, you can think of other modalities, as I was showed earlier into my stepwise approach for oxygen therapy. Same would be applicable for neonates also. Remember, all sick patients, all neonates suffering from COVID may not be requiring oxygen. So do not give empiric oxygen to all the sick neonates. Administer oxygen only if the saturation is less than 91% and have a target of 91 to 95%, not 100%. Nasal cannula remains an important modality of oxygen delivery devices. Monitor it using a pulse oximeter. There's nothing called empirical supplementation of oxygen. So try to avoid unnecessary and unmonitored use of oxygen. I think this is the important aspect when we talk of what we have learned it. Though we know it earlier also that oxygen drugs should be used judiciously, but it has become a common practice. The patient becomes the sicker is admitted, he is given oxygen. So we should be cautious that unnecessary or empirical use of oxygen should be avoided in these patients. Only with monitoring, proper assessment and individualization, we can use these devices and give the drugs to these patients. In the pediatric cases, again, probably the same principles will be applied. Look for the respiratory distress, look the patients, how they're looking it, and then you can think of the various devices that we talk of. For children, you can further escalate to the flows as per the requirement. Now, this is the other important aspect when you talk of the judicious use of these oxygen delivery devices. Each device has a flow rate which delivers the optimal FiO2 for these patients. And beyond that flow rate, we will not be achieving any additional advantage. For example, with nasal cannula, a maximum 4 liters, we will achieve 0.36 FiO2. If we go beyond 4 liters, it is not going to give us an additional advantage of increasing the FiO2 for these patients. Hence, it is very essential that it is just not the flows. The selection of the oxygen delivery devices is equally important once we say that we have to use oxygen judiciously. If patient is not maintaining, we can shift to other device like simple face mask, and obviously the flow requirement as mentioned in this table would be required. And then subsequently, in case if we are not able to achieve a target of 91 to 94%, in those situations, we can go ahead and use non-rebreathing or partial rebreathing mask as per the patient's requirement. But remember here, we have seen in the COVID-19, when we start these devices, sometimes we are so panicky, sometimes we are so anxious that we try to change devices very fast. When we start delivering these oxygen delivery devices and deliver oxygen through them, the body takes some time to adjust it. The saturation may not immediately becomes normal. It will take a couple of minutes, maybe hours. And hence, we have to be looking for the response of these devices. Increasing trend in the oxygen saturation is reassuring, and then wait for some time, continue other supportive measures, as I mentioned earlier, even for children, and then accordingly, you take decisions. These patients, you should have a monitoring chart so that you can use them appropriately. And in case if the patient is not responding, and the patient is still showing signs of respiratory distress, along with other organ dysfunction, then you can think of escalating them. Thinking of other non-invasive devices with regular patient monitoring with an target of around 90 to 94%, and then proceed further. Now, whenever we initiate these devices, you need to have good monitoring. They should be regularly, maybe hourly, and we'll say continuously. They should be monitored for the oxygen flow rate, the patency of the tubings, the leakage from these areas, and humidification. Very, very important to monitor all these aspects so that we can come down with the oxygen flows as per the patient's requirement, as per the patient's response, and we are not wasting oxygen unnecessarily. In adult patients, as I mentioned earlier, in case if these patients are not responsive to oxygen delivery devices like nasal cannula, face mask, or high flow nasal cannula, we can go ahead and use the subsequent escalated devices so that we can provide these patients good oxygen supplementation. Do monitor them appropriately for various clinical symptomatology. I again mention even for adults that these patients, because of the extensive involvement of the respiratory function, they may take some time to respond to the initial supplementation of oxygen. So we can use either escalation therapy or de-escalation therapy with regards to the oxygen supplementation as for these patients also while they are being assessed. So to have a judicious use of oxygen in these patients so that we are not wasting them, and simultaneously patient is receiving what they need to be received. We should be clear about the indications and contraindications for each modality of oxygen delivery that we are looking for. A timely switching from one oxygen delivery device to the other is very important, and hence it requires regular monitoring of these patients. Shifting from oxygen by face mask or nasal cannula to a non-invasive ventilation vis-a-vis invasive ventilation is primarily based on clinical evaluation of the patient. And this will allow us to know what we can say and what we have learned in the last two waves, specifically last wave, that if we understand this transition from one device to other, from one strategy to other, from escalation to de-escalation timely of these patients, this is what is required, needs to be understood for rational use of oxygen. I'm repeating certain things again because this is what we have learned. We don't need oxygen saturation of 100%. A target oxygen saturation of 90 to 94% is acceptable. COPD patient, 88 to 92% is acceptable. The BiPAP should be preferred over HFNC. Timely use, appropriately use will have beneficial effect on the patient. The FHNC should be used under supervision We have seen that many of these things has happened in outside hospital settings, which may not be appropriate because the proper uses, proper monitoring may not be possible outside the hospital setting. Other ancillary measures like prone positioning, chest physiotherapy, the use of drug therapy, prevention of infection, use of steroids in selected group of patients remains the additional modality when we talk of rational use of oxygen. In case of its shortage, we have always think of triaging these patients as per the oxygen status. And that is what I just mentioned about escalation and de-escalation, so that we can use the available oxygen delivery devices appropriately in our cohort of population. Also, it becomes very, very important to understand that the audit of oxygen use needs to be done appropriately. Sometimes this audit is not only for the use of oxygen for a particular patient from clinical indication point of view, but we also need to understand that this auditing needs to be done whether the oxygen is not being leaked or wasted from some of the devices, so that we can prevent wastage of the oxygen. Patient needs to be reviewed early and de-escalation may be done as per the requirement. The other important aspect for rational use of oxygen is proper training of the healthcare who are involved in oxygen or who are involved in COVID management of these patients, whether they are nursing professionals, whether they are other ancillary staff, the technicians. We need to train them properly so that they understand that which device and what flow would be appropriate for these patients. And they can also check that their equipment are working properly. There is no leakage at the level of wall-mounted outlet where the oxygen is delivered, at the piping, at the tubings. And this becomes very, very essential to understand. The oxygen consumption should be regularly monitored. There should be some oxygen audit team which can take care of the usage of oxygen, so that the shortage, the acute shortage, may not be happening at a particular point of time. The oxygen uses, prevention of oxygen spillage will help us to use the oxygen judiciously, and demand for oxygen can be done accordingly. And that just becomes very, very important to have a clinical team, a multidisciplinary team, so that the audit committee can take care and prevent any acute shortage, so that patients are not harmed in case it happens. The monitoring team may comprise of a nurse and a OT technician under the supervision of a physician, and they can check at each shift of an hospital to look for various aspects of oxygen. Various aspects, I mean delivery from the manifold, the storage, delivery at the patient end, that is the various pipeline system and oxygen outlet, and whether there is any leakage, and whether all patients are appropriately and optimally receiving oxygen. And that is the committee and team will help us to reduce the risk of acute shortage of oxygen at multiple levels. Storage and prevention of wastage and ensuring safety, just to summarize, is one of the important aspects for optimal and judicious use of oxygen. Now, coming to the liquid oxygen, again, it has emerged as one of the important tools, because liquid oxygen tank can take care of supply to the whole hospital, and hence it was very, very essential to understand. And many of the new plants of liquid oxygen were installed at various places by the government agencies, which has provided the oxygen sources to majority of our patient. But then the storage of the liquid oxygen and any spillage from the oxygen tank should be very cautiously taken care of, so that these plants are working well. There is no spillage, there is no wastage from them, there is no leakage from them, and we can use what is available to us. So do have a proper maintenance and upkeep of these activities. And this has become very essential. I'm sure most of us are taking care of our manifold system very well. But the COVID has realized that even a liter of wastage is important. And that's why maintenance and upkeep of these activities is important, because any wastage is not acceptable in this COVID time, wherein these patients were receiving oxygen. Also, we need to remember that during COVID, many of these patients need to be shifted from wards to ICU, from ICU or ward to a CT scanner rooms. So there was a lot of shifting of these patients required for clinical purpose. And for this, probably we require a transport oxygen cylinders. And these oxygen cylinders, because they are being moved a lot, they are being fixed onto the trolleys, on the machines. So these transport oxygen cylinders, because of this transport, they were damaged, the walls were damaged. And hence we should be very, very cautious that not only to check these cylinders and oxygen walls regularly, but we should also be using them appropriately. Use cylinder carts with securing mechanisms so their walls are not damaged. Keep the protective cylinder caps in place during the transport. Do not transport cylinders for use that are not appropriately labeled, and do not be drop, drag, roll, or allow the violent collision between cylinders, because we will be wasting them. So this is what we have learned, that even a single cylinder, a transport cylinder of oxygen, is very precious for us. So use them appropriately. Do have safe storage of these cylinders. There are certain guidelines which have been mentioned, which only ensures us to safely store these things. But also we have to use the connector systems in manifolds so that these are not damaged, because these are a major source of leakage which we have observed in the auditing system, and this needs to be prevented in our patients. We also need to have all safety considerations while handling liquid oxygen. I may not be going into detail for this, but this is primarily for the purpose that if we can maintain our oxygen delivery at these sources of liquid oxygen tank or a manifold, we can provide oxygen to our patients uninterruptedly, because many of the times we have seen that, because if appropriate maintenance and care is not being taken at these levels, there could be concerns with the shortage of oxygen. And hence, we have to have a written policy, a written SOP for maintaining these oxygen handling units of all the hospitals. We also need to be very careful about the personal and institutional safety with regards to the facilities. Try to have, we have seen a couple of things that sometimes because of particular issue, because of the breakdown, patient needs to be shifted from one place to the other, from one hospital to the other, from one ward to the other. And hence this causes a lot of wastage of the oxygen during this transport. And hence we have to have safety considerations at each point, that any eventuality that can lead to wastage of a bed, oxygen bed, needs to be avoided in these patients. So what we have learned from the last two waves with regards to the judicious use of oxygen: medical oxygen is expensive and it is a drug. So it needs to be prescribed under the medical supervision. All oxygen delivery devices should be used with physician's recommendation. And we have already talked of the appropriate use of oxygen delivery devices as per the patient requirement. Calculate the dose, calculate the frequency, that is what I mean by flow, as per the patient's requirement, with a target endpoint, which is not 100%, which is 90-94%. Whatever the oxygen delivery devices are, we need to look them appropriately. The ventilator strategies needs to be individualized. Identify the patients in distress, and accordingly, device chosen for that particular patient should be appropriate. Also, we need to reassess these patients frequently so that we can de-escalate and reduce the oxygen flow at the earliest as per the patient assessment. Use other modalities that helps to improve the respiratory function, maybe chest physiotherapy, maybe use of drugs, maybe use of patients' motivation for deep breathing exercises, and more importantly, use of proning, which has been found for increasing the lung recruitment to a large extent. Also ensures to have a regular surveillance system to prevent wastage. Keep a backup stock of the oxygen at your store. Do have an audit committee that can take care that how much supply is available, how much is required, how much more you want, and use them appropriately. Overstocking may not be required because we want to use it judiciously at other centers. So that's why the audit committee has an important role for auditing the requirement as per the patient profile at a particular center, and accordingly, the oxygen should be maintained in your group of patients. Having said that, try to look for the other strategies, optimizing the other systems of the patients also. Try to have the general ICU care of maintaining all the norms that I have mentioned earlier should be followed for these patients so that these patients can be weaned off from the oxygen at the earliest. Try to manage the thrombotic and thromboembolic phenomena. Use the anticoagulants appropriately in these patients so that the shunt which is happening at the level of lung is taken care of. The exchange becomes better and you can wean them off. Provide them good analgesia. At times, these patients may be having various type of pains because of the embolic phenomena. And when somebody has a pain, the oxygen requirements increases. When somebody has an infection, the oxygen requires increasing. So try to provide them good analgesia. Try to prevent them having secondary infections, bacterial infections, and take care of this. Also, the optimal use of sedation. This has become a major issue because sometimes these patients are very restless, they are anxious, they are because of this anxiety, they are breathing at a faster rate and oxygen requirement is much higher. So sedate them appropriately, an optimal sedation, so that they are not panic, they are not agitated, but you use them appropriately. Don't over sedate them, and hence again individualization would be required for these patients. Do give them thromboprophylaxis in selected group of patients who are at high risk of thrombosis. Assess these patients appropriately and start them as and when required. In case these patients are on ventilators, do give them spontaneous breathing trial. What I mean, they should be weaned off from the ventilator strategies at the earliest, depending upon regular monitoring of these patients, regular giving them spontaneous breathing trials so that we can wean them off. Use of drug therapies appropriately as the patient's requirement is important. Now, just last couple of slides, I just want to take you through that the patients probably sometimes would require management at home also, because sometimes because of this panic situation, the patients has been rushed to the hospitals. But this COVID-19 has taught us that telehealth is also a good option. If we have a good robust system of telecommunication of these patients, many of these patients who are in the mild category can be very well managed. And in case if they deteriorate, this telehealth will allow us to triage these patients again so that we can bring them back to the hospital and treat them accordingly. Point here is we have to have some triaging system for appropriately managing these patients at very center. And hence we need to individualize based on the individual approach and assessment so that we can manage these patients. There are various ways of teleconsultations that has emerged during the COVID-19. All are okay. Whatever you think is appropriate at your center, you can start with. And even with the policy making from the NMC, they have already allowed with some riders that this can be used effectively. And we should use them because this will prevent us getting overloaded into the hospital of patients who may not be requiring oxygen, or unnecessarily they will be started on oxygen. The COVID-19, many things has emerged. We are learning a lot. I hope the e-learning will continue in this format. Any new things will come up, I think we'll be sharing again and again with different speakers and experts at various platforms. So we have to update ourselves so that we can provide the evidence-based, though evidence is emerging, but still we can provide them best care. We need to learn ourselves. We need to get more data from all of us that what is best for the patients and try to use them. Meanwhile, we need to train ourselves. We need to practice ourselves. We need to understand each aspect of COVID management so that the patients remain safe, and all those things, the knowledge update, the skill update needs to be done even for the judicious use of oxygen so that we are not wasting them, but even our patients are not deprived of oxygen, those who wants. All preventive strategies must go on. I'm just leaving you on this slide. If we can prevent using for following COVID appropriate behavior and good vaccination, I hope patients getting admissions will be much lesser, and we can say that the oxygen will be saved, and whatever oxygen is available, we can use them more judiciously if we follow all preventive strategies for our patients. Thank you so much, and I'm open to any questions, suggestions, and comments from the August gathering listening to us.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Actually, in the last April, we had a very heavy shortage of oxygen, leading to even escorting of the oxygen lorries by police, because we do not know, but who is, of course, everybody is in need and every hospital is in need of oxygen. But there were instances where the lorries were not routed to the correct place and when they're involved. And not only that, so we have passed through all the stages. The main thing is the recruitment of the more alveoli into the function, the alveolar and microcirculation. That has to, we have to recruit the more thing. And another is the monitoring of the patient, regular monitoring of the patient. Whenever the saturation increasing more than 97 or something like that, you can decrease the oxygen, and we can also decrease the consumption of oxygen in that way. Will you please tell us about the Venturi principles and how it will help to decrease the percentage of oxygen, and the volume of oxygen that can be used?
Absolutely. I think you rightly mentioned that the judicious use of oxygen will depend upon judicious use of oxygen delivery devices. And we do have, when we say judicious use, we need to say that one is escalation and de-escalation of oxygen therapy, and one is how can we titrate. So when we talk about the Venturi devices, the Venturi devices do have an option to increase or decrease the FiO2. So monitoring is required. We have an we have a pulse oximeter with us, a target of 90 to 94%. And based on this Venturi delivery devices that we have, we can increase the FI. A minimum FI can be kept for these patients. Now, if we just give them so high flows, high FI, so the titration becomes a little difficult, number one. Number two, when we use high FI Venturi, they require a higher flows. So this means if it is not desirable, that high flow is a wastage of oxygen for that particular patient. We are not targeting 99-100%. We are targeting say around 92, 93% for these patients. So this Venturi delivery devices will help us to come down with the oxygen flow as per the patient need, and hence these devices has become popular as a part of oxygen delivery devices. And especially when we say a titrated oxygen, when we say oxygen is being prescribed for the patient depending upon his requirement, the selection of these devices becomes important.
Okay, do you think, do you say that pulse oximetry is enough, or we have to monitor with the ABZ?
I think this is a very important question, sir. The monitoring tools, I think the first important monitoring tools is always the clinical parameters. We have to have clinical parameters. There are certain things. If patient is panicky, patient is showing cyanosis, patient is having a high respiratory rate, he is not responding. In spite of oxygen supplementation, his respiratory rate is much higher, say 30, 35, that is more than 24. This itself shows that the patient is in having some hypoxemia and the body is trying to compensate. And when we start supplementing them with oxygen, these parameters, clinical parameters, should subside down, and that indicates that the oxygen delivery is appropriate. Having said that, and objective measurement in the form of pulse oximeter is a good option. That must be there for all the patients. ABZ requirement will only be for difficult patients. Difficult patient, I will classify those patients who are requiring because of multi-organ involvement. If they are requiring non-invasive or specifically I say invasive monitoring, invasive ventilative strategies, probably in these patients would be required because the lungs are too bad. It is just not the FI or PaO2. We are looking for the other organ functions also. including the PCO2, looking for the lactate levels. As I mentioned, that some amount of sepsis can increase the oxygen requirement. So for those patients who has involvement of other organ function, and we want to look for optimizing just not the oxygen, but we are looking for, say, permissive hypercapnia. We are looking for the control of infections. Probably in those group of patients, ABG is also required.
Okay, then what about the PSI units of oxygen? Actually, it delivers only 93% or 94% of oxygen in the PSI units. So how we can titrate with them?
I think that's not a big issue, because whatever the medical oxygen that we're using with various devices, whether we're talking about the oxygen concentrator, the PSI units, the cylinder-based oxygen delivery devices, I think whatever the oxygen delivery devices, we have to look for the end target for it. And the end target is we are looking on the patient's side. We are looking for the pulse oximeter. We are looking for the clinical conditions. I think that is not going to affect much, because point here is the oxygen has to be titrated. Whatever the percentage of, whether it's say 99% or 93, 94%, or with various oxygen concentrators fluctuating somewhere. So again, the titration has to be done. There's nothing called a fixed formula that this patient would require 4 liters of oxygen at 0.4. So we cannot prescribe this. We have to titrate the oxygen depending upon the patient's requirement. And then accordingly, whatever devices we are using it, we can titrate based on that particular device. For example, when I talk of the use of non-invasive ventilation, there could be some amount of leakage. Patient is hyperventilating. Patient is having higher ventilatory rates. There could be some leakage, and there could be some dilution of the oxygen through those leakages. And hence these patients may require a little higher FiO2. But if it's a tight fitting mask, there is no dilution, then probably the patient will require lesser FiO2. So this means whatever the source of oxygen we are using and whatever the oxygen delivery devices we are using, we have to titrate them as per the patient's requirement.
Okay, of course, there are no questions in the chat box. Anybody would like to comment? Dr. Prem Kumar or Chilumuri or anybody?
Dr. Garg, I have a question, sir.
Yes, sir.
I grew up during the period when oxygen damage in the newborn lung was understood, many precautions were taken, etc. And in the early period of this pandemic, there was a lot of anxiety about oxygen availability, and then oxygen became available in the adult. In the ill individual who had already been on a ventilatory device or a flow device of some sort, how does one detect oxygen toxicity? For example, cough, throat irritation. There are as much symptoms of oxygen toxicity as they are of the disease itself. I wondered, you might alert the audience about how not to do too much.
Absolutely. I think you have hit the nail, sir. So when we are talking about the oxygen shortage, we are overzealous use of oxygen. Obviously, any drug which is given more than required, it will have toxicity. And same thing is with oxygen toxicity also. We know that oxygen toxicity leads to formation of free radicals. And whenever the free radicals are made in the body, they will affect the lung alveoli. They will affect the alveolar complex. The exchange will be affected. They will lead to changes at the mitochondrial level also. So this means this toxicity has to be prevented. Usually, there are 2 points here. One is, I will put it in a simpler format. Say a patient comes to us and the first saturation is, say, 80%. Patient is clinically showing signs of, say, hypoxemia or hypoxia, I can say. Now, this is a point where we can start the patient on high flow oxygen, whatever it is. We start with high. Now, something is called now de-escalation therapy. With high flow oxygen, patient may be trying to compensate initially, but when you try supplementing, the clinically patient will get better. Now, this is the point wherein we have to decrease the oxygen. And when we talk about oxygen toxicity, these patients, if you see the COVID patient, and we have seen in our experience, it's not a matter of minutes and hours that they will be weaned off from the oxygen. Once they are starting oxygen, they will take couple of days, probably majority of patients, especially those who are in moderate to severe category. So once they are starting on high flow oxygen without control, they will show signs of oxygen toxicity if you are giving them too much. And that's why, which Dr. Ram K. Ram want to emphasize, look for those signs, look for this modality. Sometimes it becomes difficult to identify the signs of oxygen toxicity vis-a-vis the respiratory compromise because of the disease itself. And hence it becomes prudent not to overburden them with oxygen flow, and hence the regular monitoring with regards to clinical parameters, with regards to pulse oximeter is very, very essential for these patients. And every trial should be given to wean them off the oxygen at the earliest, so that not only we are harming the patient with oxygen toxicity, but we are also using a judicious use of oxygen. That is a precious commodity at this point of time. Absolutely, you have very well said, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Prem Kumar wants to comment something, sir.
Yeah. At the outset, I congratulate Dr. Garg for walking us through very extensively and about the basics of oxygen therapy, well covered. And if you permit, I have quite a few questions about this oxygen therapy.
Sure, sir.
So, number one, here, when we provide non-invasive ventilation, we can provide non-invasive ventilation through a portable BiPAP or even through a critical care ventilator. I understand that when you provide pressure support with CPAP through a critical care ventilator, it consumes more oxygen to maintain the CPAP. So what's your comment on this?
Absolutely, I agree, Professor Prem Kumar, because you rightly mentioned that when I said the auditing team should be a part of the oxygen management, we need to understand that how our equipments are functioning. So selection of equipment is important. If you see the ventilators, some of the ventilators works primarily or driven by oxygen itself. Some of the ventilators are driven by the air. So that understanding is important, because when we use ventilators, like for example, in operating room, they're working on it and they will just take away 60 to 70 liters of oxygen just for the purpose of driving the bellows in this. And hence it becomes essential to understand our equipments. Let's choose an equipment which may be working on a compressor based, or it will be using the air instead of oxygen for driving the bellows, so that we can save that aspect. And then subsequently, whatever oxygen is being delivered is absolutely fine. Second aspect, whatever the device we are using it, we should be maintaining them appropriately. The leakage around the mask or their seal is not appropriate, or the patient cooperation is not appropriate. Again, they lead to the mismatch between the oxygen delivery by these devices and being delivered to the patients. With regards to the more recent ventilators, some of the ventilators can be driven by air. So I think they will conserve oxygen. The portable devices uses the atmospheric air, and they can be attached to the oxygen concentrator sometime, and then we can increase the FI. So these are the various modalities and options that are open to us, depending upon the availability, depending upon the understanding of the equipment. We need to choose our device very judiciously. And your point is absolutely well taken. Understanding of equipment is essential for us, especially when we are going through a phase where something is in shortage.
Right, Dr. Garg. Actually, what I observe is most of the cases in most of the hospitals, including government hospitals, NIV is provided through a critical care ventilator where there is a huge consumption of oxygen. And if there is really an availability and there is no depth of portable BiPAPs, which use atmospheric air, a compressor, and a little percentage of oxygen can be supplemented with a nasal prongs or like that from outside, that would save a lot of oxygen, because this is one of the advices to be given to all the people who handle the critical care units to conserve the oxygen. And the next question is, so the hot topic is the new variant, the B11529. And I have gone through the literature that is available about this. And it is said that the Delta virus is 60% more transmissible than Alpha. And the B11529 is 500 times more transmissible than 500%, means 5 times more transmissible than this Delta. So this looks like we have already had the havoc in the second wave by the Delta. And if this new variant, the 11529, is 500% or 5 times more transmissible, so any large percentage, obviously that much transmissibility means large number of infections. We are not yet understood whether it causes more severe disease, more hospitalizations or ICU admissions or deaths. But at least if the transmissibility is more, the case burden will be more. Obviously, the 14% of it and the 5% of it which require ICU will be more. So if that comes to our country, I expect our health system capacity will be overwhelmed. So as a critical care specialist, in a situation where our health system capacity is overwhelmed, and what is your take on alternative methods like splitters or trunk masks, and some people use Bain circuits. And recently I have seen one more device, OptiFlow, where the NIV mask is fitted to a tube and a CPAP valve. Earlier in the beginning of our lives, before the ventilators, we used to use CPAP 5 centimeters H2O, 10 centimeters H2O, 15 centimeters H2O, CPAP valves. Like that, NIV masks attached to the wall oxygen source, and to the other end of the venturi, they added the CPAP mask. So in the wake of the current B11529 and expected surge due to increased transmissibility, what is your take on these alternative devices, Dr. Garg?
I think you have raised very, very pertinent questions, sir. So that's why in my presentation I mentioned that the COVID appropriate behavior, when we talk oxygen therapy, we have to emphasize on COVID appropriate behavior. COVID has always given us many surprises in the last 2 years, and this new variant which is coming from South Africa, and we have seen surges in the case in the European countries, we have to be cautious, and we have to follow those COVID appropriate behaviors to a large extent. We do not know how this new variants will be having interaction with the vaccination program that we are having in India using Covaxin or Covishield, whether it will be safe or not. But yes, it appears that those persons who are vaccinated, whatever the variants has come till date, they have some amount of protection against them. So I think COVID appropriate behaviors and vaccination should continue. This is also a good thing that during the COVID phase, the manufacturing of, for the healthcare personals, manufacturing of masks, the PPEs and all those preventive measures has been taken care of. There was not too much shortage, and those were appropriate. We have already been trained into using these PPE and these masks appropriately, more appropriately, and probably it appears that the hospital acquired infections to the healthcare persons will be taken care of. So this is what is preventive aspect. Now, second aspect is the devices that are available with. So in the COVID, I think I could see even good journals like NEJM or Lancet, they were publishing small letters of new devices. In fact, I also created 2 devices at my center, which I use for some of the patients. But we need to understand that why are we looking for these devices? Has they been tested appropriately? Do they have some endpoint? Do they have some mechanism which we can understand? Are they using the correct flow of oxygen, which is as per the requirement? Are we using more oxygen flow for them? So these all modalities has not been judged. And I think I'm sure that, sir, you will agree with me that developing a new equipment and the phases for its clinical testing has to be undertaken before we say that this device is appropriate for its use, for that particular use. So those devices like application of a 5 centimeter or a 12 centimeter tubing, which acts like a T-piece, which acts as an APL valve, we created those APL valve. I think those all devices are not the primary devices. We have time-tested devices available to us, which you know, which you already mentioned, sir. We have oxygen delivery devices. We know that a face mask works. We know that a non-rebreathing mask works. We know that a Venturi mask works. We know the NIV mask works, whether we are talking about attaching it to a critical care ventilator or a home-based CPAP device. We know that they have some calibrated things into it. We know that by giving them or by setting them at 0.4 FI, they will deliver 0.4 FI. But if we use other devices, we do not know how much to use them, whether they will be useful or not for these patients, because they have not been tested in volunteers. We have used them in patients. Whether it was a placebo or whether it is a device, we do not know exactly. Sometimes patient, because we are not testing for ethical reasons, just a device. We are giving them drugs. We are giving them steroids. We are making them prone. So what actually is working, we do not know. Same thing happened with drugs also, where we talk of remdesivir, we talk of tocilizumab, we're talking of steroids, pulse steroids, low dose steroids, high dose steroids. We do not know exactly that in the initial period that which actually is working. But now with a lot of studies and meta-analysis, we are able to reach it. Especially, I was really concerned when the splitters came. And these splitters, one ventilator was connected to 3 patients. I was strongly against those things because each patient has an individual lung. The disease is not uniform. One patient will require a PEEP of 5 to maintain the oxygenation. Other patient will require a PEEP of 12. In one patient, we can decrease FI to next 4 hours. Other patient may require an FI of, decrease in FI over next 12 hours. And what our previous Dr. Ram K. Ram was also mentioning, that the weaning should be done appropriately. If a patient can be weaned off in 4 hours just for the use of splitter, why we want to wean in next 12 hours? Oxygen toxicity will happen, over wastage of oxygen will happen. So this was just a rescue measure. We were struggling. But now the last 2 waves has given an option that we have not one option available with us. We have many options available with us. We are understanding the disease better. And accordingly, we need to individualize the things. Say, for example, we have 10 ventilators, we have 10 HFNC, we have 10 NRBM, and we have 100 patients with us. So why not to triage these patients? Now, this triaging has become very important, and we have done it at our center also. We were shifting and juggling between various devices as per the patient need. We never say that once the patient is on HFNC, we will not shift him. If he's feeling well, shift them back to a non-rebreathing mask and shift that HFNC to some other patient. So that's juggling between the devices should be individualized as per the patient response, and use your available response resources to the maximum rather than thinking of devices which are not very well tested. And that is what I think I will urge everybody, that this is the time we should prepare ourselves. We should be ready with ourselves with teaching, training, infrastructure, equipment, oxygen delivery devices, oxygen implants to the maximum, so that unluckily, if we have that surge, we are prepared for it.
I completely agree with you, Dr. Garg, but in case of surges only, I am talking about these all unconventional methods. Otherwise, as you said, each lung has a different characteristic of compliance and resistance system. So if you connect the splitters, so maybe the tidal volume may be delivered to a more compliant lung rather than the non-compliant lung. I understand, but only in case of surge situations, like the very first wave in Italy and all, where the things were not, ventilators and all were not available. And my question, another question is, in New England Journal of Medicine and other texts, it was mentioned that the pulse oximetries erroneously show high reading in dark-skinned people. So you have to teach us or all the listeners, so many people are practitioners, about this and the differences in pulse oximetry reading in dark-skinned people, how erroneously they show high readings. That's why we chose the cutoff of 95 instead of 92 in Government of India's guidelines.
I fully agree. Now, you have raised a very, very pertinent question that equipment availability is one thing, but I'm just, as I mentioned about ventilator, how your equipment works, understanding is equally important. So same will be applicable for pulse oximeter. And we have seen many pulse oximeters here. There were finger probes, there were skin probes, there were pulse oximeters with Masimo technology. That is one of the best pulse oximeters. So we have to understand that what actually is, for example, a patient, a dark skin patient, a patient with a nail polish on the nails, patient with having some nail structural differences, these will show RNS reading. So there are two things here. One, we need to understand the clinical parameters along with the monitoring tools. We don't have to always treat the numbers which comes on the monitors. We have to treat the patient. So clinical parameters go in sync with the monitoring tools. This is one. Second thing, as you rightly mentioned, that we need to understand the limitation of a particular equipment. A dark skinned person with nail polishes, these patients will show RNS reading. So we need to understand, and that's why whatever the data is coming up and we are targeting a saturation. Even we say that we target at 90 to 95%, but say for 92%, patient still having a high work of breathing. Maybe patient is having tachypnea, patient is showing tachycardia. There is signs of poor perfusion, the signs of hypoxemia happening or hypoxia happening. As Dr. Chakrala was asking ABG, if the lactate levels are increasing and we are not getting signs of any secondary infection to these patients, so we need to look for why this is happening. So clinical correlation is important in these patients, and accordingly we need to treat them. The third aspect is in the trends. Now, when we say the patient is responding, we need to see the trends. I think as a critical care aspect and as an anesthesiologist also, we believe more in the trends rather than a single value. We have seen patients, and I think that also occurs from something called happy hypoxia, a newer terminology which COVID has given us. These trends has become important for us. If a patient has been started with a pulse oximeter, and if we think that all the clinical biochemical parameters are okay at 94% of pulse oximeter, so this appears to be optimal for that patient. And we can continue, we can accept that with this pulse oximeter, for this particular patient, 94 appears to be okay. If patient goes 96, 97% on same pulse oximeter, this means that we can wean off with oxygen for this patient. If patient shows down a 90, we think that something is happening wrong with the patient. We need to escalate our therapy, whatever it is, oxygen or drugs or whatever, proning. So this trends also needs to be important. And your point is absolutely well taken, that we need to understand our equipment and its limitation for clinical management.
Thank you, Dr. Garg, for your excellent explanation about the more pertinent clinical questions. And I make way for others to ask questions. And in the end, if time permits, I'll chip in again for a couple of questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your inputs, valuable inputs, sir. Thank you so much.
Dr. Garg, I have one more question.
Sir.
Many of our listeners work in resource-poor conditions, not necessarily in acute care hospital, ICU. Many primary hospitals have been commissioned into COVID care. I was still concerned, and also you correctly began by saying oxygen is a drug. Be careful. I wondered if, even though we are not supposed to talk about anecdotes, I still have concerns about safety. Can you think of, or can you recall instances that you have heard where bad things happen when safety precautions were not followed, whether it is with fire or cylinder safety? Because sometimes listening to bad incidents also makes us aware of avoiding the bad incident at our place. Since I no longer practice in that kind of a situation, I wondered, what kind of stories have you heard?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely important, because we have heard very good number of stories, which is not good for us. I will not say stories, they are bad events for us, and we should be avoided. We have heard fires happen. Even recently, in a couple of hospitals, we have heard that fire happening because of the leakage at some point of time, short circuits which happen. Now, similarly, if I put it a very simple thing here, when we say the splitter in the ventilators we were talking about just now. So when a ventilator is prepared for a single patient, and we may try to use one ventilator for 3 patients, this means we are overburdening the ventilator for a thing which is not prepared for. Ventilator can deliver a couple of tidal volume, 500 ml, 1000 ml. But if you want to deliver more by splitting it, it's not made for it. Similarly would be the electrical circuits. Now we are very prone for, in India, especially when we say low resource settings, we need to have electrical driven equipments like HFNC, and the electrical outlets may not be there at each beds. And what we do is we use multi-plugs and attach 2 ventilators or 2 HFNOs or 2 electrical sockets at one socket. So this means this type of something called just buying time or making the arrangements can backfire. And this has happened. Short circuits happen. We are using high flows oxygen in these patients using HFNC. The environment is full of oxygen here. That causes a lot of issues. So I think these type of things can happen. Even at our center, what we have seen is, so when we are juggling with the oxygen, and there were some issues with the humidification. The oxygen that is being supplied by this, they should have low water vapor content into the delivery devices. So we have shutdown of various advanced ventilators because the oxygen which was coming from the oxygen tank, they have high water content, and that high water content just stuck up various walls of the ventilators. And we found that our ventilators have stopped working. And in a situation where COVID-19 is there, this has created a situation where why these ventilators are not working appropriately. So these small things, understanding our equipments are important. And then we realized that it was primarily that the humidification at manifold was not appropriate when we checked it. And then we realized that it has to be done appropriately. The filters were not working properly because earlier we were using oxygen, the usage of oxygen in a ward setting will be say 5%. 5% of beds will require oxygen in the ward. But now in the COVID, 90% of the beds required oxygen because we were admitting only moderate and severe category patients. So this means the supply was too much. The filter which needs to be changed every 3 months or 6 months, now it has to be changed every 15 days. So every staff was saying on their logbook that this filter was changed 2 months back. We still have 4 months, but no, we have increased our capacity. We have increased our usage. So the wear and tear of the various equipments, filters is increased. So we have to think of the increasing uses and change them accordingly. And these small things, I'm just giving a few examples: filters, fires, ventilators stucking up, leakage happening, manifold not working properly because they were overloaded. If you see our manifolds, especially when they're using the cylinder based, there are 2 systems here. One finish it off, second starts, second finish, cylinder change the first and starts. But the consumption was too high that the change in the timing was not appropriate. People used to think that they used to cylinder every 3 days. But now when the 100% of patients or 90% of patients require oxygen, the change was much faster. So the system has to be grilled into those technical staff. That's why I said the oxygen audit team should have also persons from the technical aspect also, from the nursing aspect also, so that it was not every 3 days that cylinder 1A and B needs to be changed. It was more frequent. So these type of small events, if not taken care of, they can be catastrophic. And we have seen a couple of cases which has come into media also. So I think that is what is required preparation. That is what is required. Maybe I can say we should have more of an check system, check control, audit teams that will take care of these small things, and we can prevent big catastrophes out of it.
Dr. Shankar Rao, it may be a little bit late in the hour, but I wanted to ask Dr. Garg's permission to pose a question to Dr. Chillamuri, who handles several hundreds of patients in his hospital. From the standpoint of safety, are there stories that will stay with people's memories? Hey, let's not make this mistake. Dr. Chillamuri.
I think the awareness that when you have so many people on either ventilators or high flow oxygens, CPAPs, whatnot, you have enormous amount of oxygen circulating in the building. So any spark could set off a fire. And I think so staff have to know how to evacuate patients, how to control those fires. Oxygen related fires are managed differently. I think these are important drills that they should know. It is too much of oxygen circulating in a given ward or a given unit, and everybody needs to be aware of it.
Thank you.
I think one of the comments that maybe I looked at your protocols, it doesn't include how you're cleaning equipment. And if you look at the mucormycosis situation in India, which is quite unique, it only happened in India, didn't happen in any other country, which raises questions of how well the oxygen-related equipment was cleaned, both in the hospital, but more importantly, once the patients were discharged. Because if you look at what happened with mucormycosis, they all happen after discharge from the initial admission. So they would be taken care of acutely discharged, they would go home, and then 2 to 3 weeks after that, they would develop mucormycosis. So what sort of protocols are in place on how nasal cannulas, oxygen canisters, all of them are being cleaned?
I think this is an important aspect because I fully agree that the patients with COVID and mucormycosis, huge number was seen. There were multiple reasons for it. One is the uncontrolled use of steroids, the early use of steroids in many of the patients, which was not warranted. The inappropriate or inoptimal control of the blood sugar levels, which has surged, and we have seen many of our patients on the first presentation, they presented with ketoacidosis, with 500, 600 sugars, with urine ketones. So probably with underlying diabetes, and even those patients who were not diabetic, their sugars were surging up 300, 400 on presentation. So this was a second aspect. With regards to equipments, I fully agree. Though there was a lot of influx of oxygen concentrators from various donations to India across globe, and they were used on home-based therapies also. But the point here is people, especially the laymen, were not aware how to clean them, how to not to share the same venturi mask or same mask among them, how to clean the water which is being used there. It was not sterile water. So I think these are the concerns, and absolutely, I fully agree with you. We need to create awareness of using equipment. Availability is one thing, but using the equipment appropriately and optimal is another thing. And third is using an equipment and not to cause more complication is equally important. And that's why we had certain SOPs whenever we get a call that somebody is okay, borderline, no other comorbidity, can be managed home. We used to give them, okay, use this way, you need to change this, you need to boil your the mask appropriately. So these were the strategies. With regards to the hospital, we agree that starting from a primary care center to a tertiary care center to a makeshift COVID center. So we had many COVID health facilities that was created, and the sterility program or the disinfection program was very variable at various hospitals. At our center, we have sufficient supply of everything. So we were using for that particular patient, they were disposed of. Once the patient was shifting from one ventilator to the other, they were disinfected appropriately using appropriate disinfectant policy. But this may not be applicable universally across this, and we need to create a lot of awareness by teaching training at various levels. We have our infection control nurses, we have a infection control committee that takes care. And if you find that this ward, this cubicle, the cultures are coming positive, patients are coming with this amount of culture, we immediately take, okay, we need to disinfect the whole ward. We need to disinfect the whole ventilator system. This type of policy needs to be created. This needs to be very strictly followed, and auditing system should be in situ. With regards to the home care-based management, which has emerged in COVID a lot, we need to create some SOPs for the public also, because every public was aware. I know so many people have purchased ventilators from, oxygen concentrators from online sources, but purchasing is not sufficient. They should be trained how to use them. And I fully agree with you. We need to create SOPs and release into the public forum so that they use the equipment, but they use the equipment more appropriately.
Actually, can I come in?
Yes, sir.
During the surge in mucormycosis cases, as a part of state expert committee, we investigated into the incidents all across the medical colleges, and we came to know that not everyone is a diabetic, not everyone used steroids, and not everyone was administered oxygen, but still it was high. We thought, and to our surprise, when we asked the hospital superintendents what was the how the humidifiers are filled. Some people said the patient's attendants used to fill the humidifiers with the Bisleri water, mineral water, and some doctors, some hospital administrators, they said the tap water is filled by the ward boys, like that. So that is one. And industrial grade oxygen was supplied those days when we were in short of oxygen those days. Finally, we couldn't come to a conclusion. And with the advice of Dr. Chilimuri, we did CD4 counts and all. They were also normal. And we took the advice of Dr. Chilimuri, and he said vinegar to be used to clean the nasal cannulas and masks and other disposables. If at all they are in adequate supply, there is no problem. But otherwise, we have to do all these things. And finally, one thing I have noticed is if a person is in the hospital, suppose he is on long-term oxygen, say he stayed in the hospital for 28 days, 30 days, never his mask or never his cannula was cleaned. As you said, each nasal cannula for one individual, that is fine. But if he's quite a long time he stays in the hospital, that was never cleaned. That is one thing. And the lay people, when they use the cloth masks, and during expiration, the inner surface of the cloth mask, with the perspiration and humidity, they got the, fungal this thing inside the mask. That could be another possibility. We have to advise lay people to wash their cloth masks also. So these are a few observations.
Absolutely. I think these are important points. Only one clarification. I do not know. Dr. Chakra Rao can answer this. There were a lot of hue and cry about the medical oxygen versus industrial grade oxygen. I do not know, to my knowledge, the manufacturing process for both the things are same, and there was a huge concerns. Dr. Chakra Rao is the expert into this. He can comment upon that, whether the medical grade oxygen vis-a-vis industrial grade oxygen, does it have impact on the clinical management and outcome? Dr. Chakra Rao, you are muted, sir. You can unmute yourself. Dr. Chakra Rao, you are muted.
There is no factories to manufacture industrial grade oxygen and medical grade oxygen. The same oxygen that is filled in the cylinders with white shoulders is called medical grade oxygen, and with the black shoulders it is called industrial grade oxygen. And no different manufacturing strategies. The same liquid oxygen, the fractional distillation of the air, compressed air, will be caught into the cylinders, and there is no difference at all. And it is all myth, and everybody is thinking. I heard even in many of the discussions, all these things, they're blaming the industrial grade oxygen. But the thing is, the industrial oxygen that is supplied in the cylinders is much cheaper and than the medical oxygen, because always when it is a medical, they charge more. That is the only thing. There is no difference, and there are no industrial grade oxygen manufacturing units.
I think any more expert can also comment upon this, because though after the COVID second wave, many of the hospitals, to my knowledge, are very well updated or upgraded about the oxygen. I've seen people getting PSI units, and they're getting liquid oxygen tanks. I hope this will take care of the, in case if the third surge comes up in India. But any comments upon the oxygen delivery from the sources about this, because this has really happened during the second wave, and we have faced this crisis also, that the delivery of liquid oxygen from various sources was a huge issue, and even single tank has to be divided between two hospitals, half here and half there, even 3 hospitals. So any other experts can comment upon with their experience?
when there is a demand for more oxygen, actually the vaporization of the liquid oxygen will be suffering. And sometimes there is not much of a heat exchangers and all those things. So definitely the delivery also may not be proper sometimes because of the extra cooling that is happening when it is delivered.
Maybe I
And
think,
more-
yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Rakesh, can we wind up this discussion because it's already 15 minutes past 8. Thank you very much, Viva. I mean, if there are no questions, we'll wind up this session here. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing your expertise. And I thank Dr. Chakarao profusely for moderating this session. Dr. Sridhar Chilumuri, Dr. Ram Kairam, and Prem Kumar for their comments. And we will meet next time, next Sunday, with Dr. Mukherjee. Dr. Mukherjee will be again winding up on the lessons that we have learned in the last 1.5 years over the treatment and vaccination. So, till that time, bye-bye, all of you, and we'll end this meeting here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you listening to and interacting to everybody. Thank you so much, sir, to you also for inviting.
Thank you, Dr. Garg.
Thank
That
you.
was excellent, sir.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.